Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And one of my favorite guests is coming right up, Robert Powell. He has written a book, and I'll show you the image of the book. A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. Well, it actually starts with the word UFOs. And I like the fact that he actually used the word UFOs and did not say UAP. So that's just my own opinion anyway. So I am away from all phone contact. While you're watching this, I'm going to be on a music cruise. But when I get back, I'm going to be right here at the Ozark Mountain UFO Conference. That's April 12th through the 14th. So if you happen to be going, send me an email, martin@podcastufo.com, and we will figure out a way to meet up, or you could join me. I may be doing some recording with possibly with Sean Cahill and a couple of others. Mark D'Antonio, of course, always. Just a couple of other things. In July, I will be the MC at the MUFON, and it's the MUFON International Symposium. The theme is the battle for UFO. I like that they didn't use UAP there either. Transparency. Also, just I have announced this a couple of times. This is coming up. It's an important interview with Jonathan Wygant and Michael Herrera. Both had encounters when they were in the Marines, and we'll be talking about that. So without further, oh yes, one more thing. The blog I may announce during this show at some point. Just waiting to hear the title of the blog from Charles Lear. And if not, the blog will be as usual on our website. And if you sign up on the side of our website, that's podcastufo.com, the sidebar you'll see, you can sign up for the newsletter and you'll get an announcement once a week on what the show is, the links to it, and the blog. And it's just a simple drop your email in and confirm it. That's all there is to it. And I promise I will not spam you or give your email information away. That is a promise. And here we go with our guest, Robert. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Martin. It's good to see you again.
I know. Yeah, we talked recently when I was doing a little talk at a amateur astronomers, and you helped me out a great deal talking about the AARO report, which there's been a lot of controversy about that since it came out. But you're here to talk about your book, and I am excited to read this book. I have a backlog of books that people are waiting for me to read, but this one, I like, that basically A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. And so how long has this been in the making?
Well, I mean, it took me, I guess, about 8 to 9 months to write the book, but the book is basically written about my 17 years of exploring this subject. So that's, I've written books before, one about the history of the subject, another, for kids. But this one's really my view of the subject based on having, personally interviewed hundreds of witnesses individually. And then I probably read thousands of UFO reports since I became involved in this 17 years ago. Right.
And I understand in the beginning of the book, you're kind of familiarizing people with the history of UFOs, which I think is very important and something that's not talked about a lot when people, try to explain away what they're seeing with these unusual propulsion and characteristics of UFOs by saying that it's something secret that we have, in the military. But they don't go back all the way back when that was just not possible to have what people were actually seeing, that we just didn't have that technology. And you can't even, explain what they were seeing. So I think history is very important. And so let's just talk a little bit about, the shift since 2017. Is that another thing I'm sure you talk about in your book?
Yes. One of the subjects that's discussed in the book is the shift that's happened since actually the New York Times report of December 17th, 2017. And I think the two biggest shifts that I've seen over the last 20 years in this subject of UAP is one, the December 17th report from the New York Times.
I just have to correct you there. It's the 16th.
16th. All right. Maybe
of 2017. Yeah.
Okay. The 16th instead of the 17th.
Yeah.
But I know I got the year right.
You
2017.
do. Yes.
And so the other part that's really key is the thousands of exoplanets that we've discovered. And I think those two items together have kind of shifted how people see the UFO subject.
Oh, absolutely. And when you talk about all the possibilities of Earth-like planets out there, I mean, I've heard, numbers quoted that there could be in just our galaxy a billion, Earth-like planets. So, I mean, it just kind of makes you wonder, especially since we're so young, what type of civilizations, and oftentimes, in my opinion, we kind of humanize what they may be doing and not really thinking. We have no way to know if they would blow themselves up like we probably will. So well, how they develop. Yeah.
When you said blow ourselves up, that's one of the things I talk about in the book, Martin, is it ties into whether or not we would expect aliens to be friendly or unfriendly. Yeah. And the argument I make is that we would consider them to be friendly most of the time, because as a civilization develops, take ours, for example, you develop the ability to annihilate yourself long before you develop the ability for interstellar travel. So yes. It's almost like nature has put in a self-limiting gadget there for interstellar travel, so that the malevolent species wipe themselves out before they can go out and wipe someone else out. So I think we're on the precipice, Yes. Sometimes I read the morning paper and it looks like we're a malevolent species, but I guess time will tell, because I would say we're at least 100 years away from interstellar travel. So we need to survive another 100 years.
Yeah, I would think that sounds about right. And not to start out as such a depressing thing, but I've talked with Bryce Zabel, who was doing research about extinction events. And he said that a lot of the world scientists that he spoke to said, well, we don't really know if we're going to be around in another 100 years. And it's, I mean, it's a little scary with, AI and all the things that could basically go wrong with AI. And one of them is just a simple thing could actually happen today, in my opinion, is that these deep fake videos, it could be like a world leader, threatening in some type of way that could cause, terrible things. So yeah, that's something we have to get through socially without blowing ourselves up.
Right.
In general. Yeah. So what are some of the things, I mean, you talk about intelligently controlled craft, and I know it's all basically speculation about where these things might come from. And I'm sure the thing that you often hear, like I do, is that, there are vast distances between other possible, planets that are out there. And so that comes up all the time. And how do how does all this figure in your book?
Okay, so let me back up a little bit then.
Sure.
So I wrote the book so that it's readable not only by the individual who really studies the UFO subject a lot, but it's also more readable for those who don't know a lot about the UFO subject. And there's two things that I talk about that I feel like I do know after 17 years of studying this subject. So one is that UFOs are physical objects. They're not just a plasma or a figment of our imagination. They're physical objects. And the second thing that I feel I do know is that they are intelligently controlled. And whatever that intelligence is, it's well beyond, our intelligence. And I go into the book and explain why I believe that. Because you have to define, what is the measurement that defines to you that you're dealing with an extraterrestrial intelligence. And the one I talk about in the book is extreme acceleration, because that requires an intelligence to generate that in a craft that's in your atmosphere. And it's done at accelerations so far beyond anything we can do. And as you said, I mean, this has been going on for 75 years now with reports of the same thing. So that's what I look at, the two things I know. Now, what you just mentioned was, the things we don't know for certain. And one of those, for example, is the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Yes.
I go into that and why I believe that's the most likely explanation. Doesn't mean it is the explanation, right? Just means at this point in time, I think it's the most likely.
Right. Yeah. I have felt that way, and then as you hear a lot, especially lately, a lot of people talking about the interdimensional, possibilities, which I also think could be a possibility. It's hard to fathom how it would work, or there could be travel between dimensions, things like that. And it's kind of mind warping in general to think that these things are possibilities. The dark matter and dark energy, that's another big mystery. And some people are thinking we're on our way to solving that with the James Webb telescope. And I don't know what your thoughts are on any of that. But I mean, it seems like there's everything kind of boils down to, Einstein's theory of relativity and all that, light travel. And, I'm just asking for your opinion. I know you like to look at things scientifically, but do you think it's possible there's faster than light travel?
Yes, I mean, I think there have been papers written on theoretical methods that could be used for faster than light travel, such as warping through space, right? Where you bend space so that, like, if you had a balloon, you basically are pinching it from one side to another. So the closest distance between 2 points is no longer a straight line. So, yeah, that's possible. It's way beyond our capabilities. But we are already talking about interstellar travel in our society today. 30 years ago, that was not even considered something you would even discuss. So there's already a program that's been proposed to create what they call light sails, right? And it's called the Breakthrough Project. And the objective being to basically hurl miniature spacecraft, which are basically computer chips, towards Alpha Centauri at 10% the speed of light. So that means in 4 years, in 40 years, you would reach it.
Right. Which is really short in a time span when you talk about the distance. Right. Yeah. So someone wrote me last night. They wanted me to ask you, and I don't know if this is even in your book anywhere or they just heard you talk about it before, but it's the Southern Ontario 1993 close encounter with a DoD engineer, kind of the dog bone shaped UFO. Is that something you have done a work on?
Yeah, there's actually several pages in the book about that Ontario case. And it actually occurred in August of 2013. So it was only less than 11 years ago. And it's the point I make in the book is UFOs do things that make no aerodynamic sense, right? Imagine a dumbbell moving through the air. So one of your questions that people often ask, this witness made this up, or, he misunderstood what he saw, right? Well, how do you misinterpret a dumbbell flying through the sky, right? and that's totally non-aerodynamic. And if you were a hoaxer, why would you say the object looked like a dumbbell, right? I mean, that's just going to make your story even harder to believe.
Make you look like a dumbbell.
Yeah, exactly. Make you look like a dumbbell. Well, in this story, what happened, there were three guys out hunting black bear up in Ontario. One of the three gentlemen is also a research scientist with contracts with the Department of Defense. This case was so good and so interesting, right? I wanted to know, okay, is this true or not? So I actually flew up and met the guy. I toured his research facility where he has engineers that work for him. And I toured a DOD facility that manufactures some of the products he makes for the Department of Defense. So this guy has always remained anonymous because he doesn't want to jeopardize, the jobs that he gets from the DOD. But he was an excellent witness in terms of seeing the detail and transcribing everything that he saw. And so I spent about 3 pages in the book on that particular case.
And did he get images? Any pictures?
So here's what happened. When he first saw the object, they first saw it. They were in the middle of nowhere, right? Their cell phones don't work. They're on a logging road. It's 9:30 at night. He's in the back of the pickup truck. The other 2 guys are in the front. He sees a light coming behind him. So his first concern is, hey, we're in the middle of nowhere. What is a helicopter, for example, coming towards us, right? So he's concerned that something nefarious is going on, right, in the backwoods of Ontario. Well, as this light begins to approach, it comes around, and then it stops approximately 450 feet in front of him because he's measuring it against the tree line. And the object is this giant barbell. So the first thing he does is he turns on his cell phone. Well, his cell phone is like acting as if it's booting up. So he can't take a picture with his cell phone. So he grabs his Sony camera and he turns on the camera to photograph this object. As soon as he turns the camera on, the camera turns off. As soon as he does it again, the camera turns off. So his view is there's some type of electromagnetic interference that's keeping his camera from working. And he suspects this because he sees this 6-inch plasma all around this barbell-shaped object. So this continues for a minute or two as they watch this, and then the object starts to move away. Well, the research scientist says, okay, it's moved farther away. Let me try my camera again, because he suspected, as it gets far enough away, the interference with his camera will stop. So now he turns the camera on, and this time it stays on. And so he begins recording the object, and you can hear his voice and the voice of the other men. But what you see on the video is just gibberish on the screens. It's total garbage. And so the video has been interfered with, but the audio is still working. And so he has that recording. He keeps it in a little safe at his engineering lab. And while I was up there, we put it on an oscilloscope and looked at the traces that were detected off the camera. And it's really an interesting case. Yes,
I do remember hearing details. Maybe it's when you were on my show at some other point. We may have talked about this in particular. Has he ever talked about it publicly, or is this something he just does not want to do?
No, there's one video online. It's hard to find where he actually dubs his own voice. So you don't. He didn't even want us to do that because he wanted to use software that he knew no one could unscramble to detect who he was. So he did the scrambling, and there is a video of him talking about the event, but he's never gone public.
And it's kind of sad that someone has to worry about losing their job, when they see something incredible. I mean, and it may not be just UFOs. It could be related to other things as well. It's
right. And when I asked him about it, because when I met with him, I can tell he's well off. So as he told me, it wasn't so much he was worried about him losing his job, right, as it was he did not want his engineers to lose their jobs, right? Because if he lost the contracts, then his engineers lose their jobs. So that was his biggest concern.
Yeah. So that is really fascinating sighting. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you ever heard of the one, I want to say it was like Pacific Grove or something like that, where this guy goes up in a tree, the two hunters, and there was like this robot type of alien encounter. Have you ever heard of that one?
I may have. There's so many different, reports out there.
Yeah. I mean, it is. Here's a couple of things, I was thinking of, and you may or may not know the answer to, but when things are coming in, like if we had like an asteroid coming in toward the Earth, we have all these ways of detecting it. What about when the crafts are supposedly, we think they're coming in, are they like blinking in this area? If it had to do with like a type of speed for them to get here, or why aren't they detected in the outer atmosphere by different satellites?
So that's an excellent question, Martin. And in studying the UFO subject, right, there are many cases where the object does not show up on radar. But there are many other cases where the object does show up on radar. So to answer your question, I would suspect, right, that NORAD because we have radar systems that look outwards all around the Earth. And they're capable of detecting, I believe, something the size of a baseball at 5,000 miles. So
amazing.
I would think that we could detect them. But the problem is there's two possibilities. One, either we detect them and we don't tell anyone about it, right? So that all stays classified. Second possibility is we don't detect them because we don't really look for them, right? Because if you think about it, there is just a ton of space debris and satellites all around near Earth orbit. And that would make so much data that what I'm quite sure they do is they filter it out, right? So if you have they're looking for objects moving in orbit, and they're looking for objects going into orbit or leaving orbit. And those objects have a certain characteristics in terms of speed and the angles at which they move, right? And so they probably just delete out anything that doesn't match what they're looking for, because they're looking for, right, missiles and anything that could be an attack on the United States.
I understand. I see it. I think I've talked to someone else that said there's some type of filtering system, and that's why they're not, really taken seriously or looked at. But I mean, they could change that at any time.
Oh, if they wanted to go look for them, they could. Yeah. Yes.
Right. And it's always makes you wonder what they know.
Right. Yeah.
NORAD.
See, that's the thing in our society, right? There's so much information they don't tell us about.
Yeah.
That's what causes all of our conspiracy theories, because I mean, it's easy to say, oh, they've got to know, right? They have to know this is happening. But it's also possible that they don't really know because they're not looking.
Yeah. Those are both possible. So I guess I want to ask you, since you are approaching this in a scientific way, do you think there's any outstanding cases alone that you singled out, besides the one you just talked about, that really need, some type of explanation that we can't explain?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of cases that we can't explain, which is kind of my problem with the Arrow report, right? There's so many cases and they don't even mention them. But I mean, just to name a few, the 2004 Nimitz incident with the F-18s. I mean, that's never been explained. The Stephenville case is not explained. The Aguadilla case is not explained. I believe it's 1973 case involving a retired, not a retired Army colonel, but Air National Guard colonel in Ohio, where they had a helicopter. It's called the Coin case.
Oh yeah, the Coin incident. Yeah.
I mean, that's never been explained. The incident over at Tehran, Iran in 1976 with the F-4 fighters that intercept a jet, that's never been, explained. The RB-47 case from 1957, where an aircraft somewhat similar to modern day electronic eavesdropping type of aircraft was basically followed by a UFO for almost 2 hours. In the Minot, there's a case out of Minot Air Force Base that involved the B-52, and it's still in Blue Book today. There's images on radar of the object that the B-52 detected. And from one image to the next, this object's on one side of the aircraft, and then in the next split second, it's on the other side of the aircraft, a mile on either side.
Is that the one that James Fox opened up his film with? The B-52? I know it was a B-52 bomber. It flew over the field below them. It was a disc that flew over. They saw it flying ahead of them.
Yeah. Now this was not a disc-shaped object. They did see it when they flew over. They saw it landing. It was sitting on the ground, according to the pilots. And if I remember right, it was shaped like maybe you might say half of a disc with a kind of a more of a angular type tail.
Almost like what Kenneth Arnold?
Yeah, maybe a little bit more like that than a typical disc.
Yeah. I when I do these talks, sometimes I kind of forget that, there's a lot of people that are looking into UFOs for the first time that watch this show, and I get some email occasionally. So I'd like to actually, explore a couple of the cases that we just mentioned. If there's any of them in particular you want to kind of go through, kind of like the, is it the Minot one? That one I'm kind of unfamiliar with myself. If you could explain that one a little more detail.
There's a case, and it's in the Project Blue Book files. It occurs at Minot Air Force Base, and it was October of 1968. And what happens in this case is initially the guys that run the missile silos are seeing these objects, and it's at night, so they cannot see the shape. They just see the light from the object. And these objects are hovering outside of a missile silo, right? And that's a major problem, since these are nuclear missile silos. So they reported in, and so this goes on for a while during the night, and then the commander of the base, there's a B-52 coming back in from a training exercise. So he asked the B-52 to circle around the base before he lands to see if he sees anything. Well, and the B-52 comes near this unknown object. And so the B-52 detects it on radar, and you can actually see the image on radar of what it's detecting. And as they're flying the object, they later see the object on the ground. And so some of the guys, make a drawing of what they saw. One of the things that's been done with that case is a French physicist. His name was Claude Poher. He took the radar data and he calculated the distance the object traveled based on the time between radar sweeps. And I don't remember the exact G-forces, but it was something over 200 G-forces of acceleration that would have had to have occurred for that object to have moved from one location to the next location. showed up on radar.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, I didn't know that one in particular, and that's definitely not the same one I was thinking about when I mentioned James Fox opening. That was but I do believe it was a bomber, but I just can't remember much of the detail on that. But yeah, the G-force. That's when you're talking about just an unexplained 1968. There's no way anything that we had could probably even survive mechanically, never mind if there was a passenger,
right,
with that type of G-force.
No, nothing we have would survive 200 G-forces.
Right.
About the only thing that might survive that's like an artillery shell that you fire.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's really something. And let's see, let's just touch on one or two other cases that you think are really important. Now, the Tic Tac case, you and I have actually did a whole show on that, and it was very well received when that first, came out. Basically, that whole thing came out, and that's a fascinating one, and I think one of the top ones with all the data in that. But what I wanted to ask you about that particular case is, I watched Sean Kirkpatrick in a conference, and anybody could watch it live stream. I don't know how many people were watching, but anyway, he was asked from one of the journalists in the audience, well, what about the 2004 so-called Tic Tac incident? And he was up on the podium, and he's kind of like snickering. He says, well, everything, all the data that we have on that particular case, we're not going to look into it because all the data you have is on YouTube. And that was the end of the story. And I thought that was such a farce. I pointed that out because, first of all, the Hawkeye lands and the data bricks come off and they go into the safe like they're supposed to. And then someone, this is all purported, but someone possibly from the Air Force landed on the ship and had them remove the captain meets the person down who's in charge of it. They take it out of the safe and those data bricks are taken away. So what do you suppose happens to hard data that they don't want anyone to know about?
Yeah, that case is the one that caused me to change my views on whether or not the government has some information that they're hiding, right? Because in the past, my views have always been that no, there was no agency out there that was grabbing data and hiding it, right, on the UFO subject. I just had not seen sufficient evidence. But when I investigated the Nimitz case, I changed my mind because there's no doubt in my mind that someone took the data off the USS Princeton. I'm positive of that. So the question is, who took it, right? And they took it within 24 hours of the event.
Yep.
So I was talking to a friend of mine who used to work in the National Security Agency in the NSA. And I was telling him, I was trying to figure out, okay, who would know this, right, within 24 hours? I mean, the Navy would know because their carrier strike group was involved. NORAD might know because supposedly their radar system should have been able to detect the same thing the USS Princeton detected, right? And I said, but those are the only two agencies I could think of. And then he made a good point, which I never thought of. He said, well, the NSA monitors our ongoing military operations all the time. I said, really? You mean we just listen in on our own people? And so that appears to be a potential answer, right? It could be one of the three-letter agencies that came out and grabbed the data. There's no way to know for sure who it was that took the data, but we know that a helicopter landed on the USS Princeton and removed the data that was on that ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's probably not the only data. I mean, they must have, for instance, we see just this little clip, this little tiny clip. That's all we see of the Tic Tac there, and then shooting off. And people have tried to debunk that, Mick West, as all different types of things. But, that's pretty intriguing for
Yeah.
one. And
Yeah.
there's,
The problem with trying to, and Mick and I actually debated that, and in the two biggest problems with trying to say, oh, that's another airplane. That's his argument, right? Another airplane is what
right.
you're looking at. Well, first, our fighter jets know if they're looking at another aircraft. The equipment on board tell them.
Yeah.
Second, that was in a military operating area. Nothing is supposed to be in that military operating area that the USS Princeton wouldn't know about, right? Because they're in control of all that airspace. So that some plane just happened to be there, right, that wasn't supposed to be there, is just a huge coincidence. And then the other thing is, there are 3 instances that day within 24 hours that indicate extreme acceleration. One was the video, right?
Mm-hmm.
2 was the radar on the USS Princeton, where the head of radar there indicates that the object drops in like 0.78 seconds. That's extreme acceleration. And the third is Fravor and Slate and the other 2 pilots who see this object disappear from view from 2 different angles. One of them's up here, one of them's down here. But all 4 pilots say this object disappears within 2 seconds. So it's just some basic trigonometry to calculate how fast that object has to accelerate to disappear in 2 seconds. And even if it took 4 seconds or 6 seconds to disappear, the G-forces required are well beyond any capabilities we have, because we calculated numbers that went up into the hundreds of G-forces.
Right. And, I'm part of a group that meets most Thursdays. Not going to be this Thursday, I don't believe, or they'd be going without me, basically. But and it's called UAP Crossfire, not UFO Crossfire, UAP Crossfire. And so there's 3 other co-hosts, and they're all military, ex-military, and every single one of them, they're ganging up on me. They say they think it's that the Tic Tac incident was all our technology, advanced technology. And I basically argue that it just doesn't make any sense. And if that was 2004, wouldn't we know something more about that at this time, 20 years later? But there was just so many characteristics, and they're just totally convinced that it's our military, secret military.
There's no way that was our technology. And here's why. Our jets will only stand maybe 10 G-forces, and that's angular, right? Mm-hmm. That's angular acceleration as they're turning. What this object demonstrated was over 200 G-forces of linear acceleration. That means we're not even counting the angles. That's just straight, direct acceleration. Our best jets that we have can maybe accelerate 2 G-forces in linear. Because when you hear a jet, he's got on his G suit and he's going 8 Gs, that's because he's turning. And that's causing the G-forces. And the craft can only handle maybe 15 G-forces total. But for an object to linearly accelerate at over 200 G-forces, there is no black project. There's nothing we have that can do that. And anyone who thinks there is really deluding themselves, because that's not how science works. We don't suddenly go from having a clipper ship out in the ocean to having a nuclear aircraft carrier. Science comes in very small increments. We get better and better and better at what we do. So we don't suddenly go from a jet that does 2 Gs 20 years, today, to something 20 years ago that could do 200 G-forces. It's just.
Yeah. I mean, where would they, and how would they hide that technology totally? That's one of my thoughts on that. And, why haven't we seen them again,
right.
or many times?
And the thing is, Martin, just like you said, there were reports of objects doing that 70 years ago.
Right.
From pilots. that said, I
Mhm.
was looking at this object. It began to accelerate away. 1 to 2 seconds, it was gone.
And then
So,
another, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I
Sorry.
was going to say, if we had that ability, it wouldn't take us 9 months to get to Mars.
That's right. Yeah. And another thing, in my arguing is I say, why would they just randomly test that on, the Navy? And they said, oh, that's exactly what they would do to see how they would react. But I mean, they didn't have any weapons on board, I don't think, but still, it doesn't make any sense. So anyway, I'm probably going to cut this clip out and play it while I'm on that show. Your arguments against why this can't be our own technology, and it just, to me, it never made any sense that it would be. We both could be wrong. It's possible, but I think it's highly unlikely. And so I know that, to me, I always say that's one of the top cases. I really do believe it. But as far as data goes, would you say there's some other ones that come in that have, a lot of serious data?
Yeah. Another case that has, I think, good data is the Stephenville case, which I think you and I
Oh,
have
yeah.
probably talked about, right?
Yeah.
I was able to get FAA radar data on that case.
Hmm.
And what in the probably the to give your audience a feel for what happened there, this was in January of 2008. And all of a sudden, there were dozens of reports coming out of Stevenville, Texas, of these unknown lights that they were seeing at night. So I drove to Stephenville to investigate this case. And one of the witnesses I talked to was the constable. And I interviewed him, got his testimony, and then I ordered FAA radar data. And when I got the radar data, the most amazing thing was that there was radar data that supported what the constable stated to me, because he says there's objects roughly 2 miles south of my house, and he tells me the time. He knows the time because his wife is watching her favorite show. And so I go to the radar data, I go to that time, and sure enough, on radar, you see this object 2 miles south of his home, and it's just barely moving, just short little jumps from here to there, within a mile of each other. And then the constable says this object he goes in to get his wife to come outside, and she won't come outside because she's watching her favorite TV show. She doesn't care if there's UFOs or not. She's not missing her show. So he comes back outside with his son, his 9-year-old son. And now these objects are no longer south of his home. They're directly up above. And he sees 9 to 11 lights just randomly, just moving about in random fashion. And then suddenly the 9 to 11 lights come together, and then in synchronous movement, they all move, as he described it, to the northeast at the speed of light. Now, he was being facetious by the speed, but he meant extremely fast.
Mm.
Okay, so what did I see on radar? Well, these objects that were south of his home, suddenly in the next radar point that I get, the objects are northeast of his home. And the time and the speed at which they were traveling had to be a minimum speed of 1,900 miles an hour and an acceleration of 9 to 10 G-forces minimum. And we don't have any type of craft that can sit still like these did in the air, right? Because the only things that can do that are like an F-35 or a helicopter, and then suddenly accelerate to 1,900 miles an hour within 10 seconds. And the G-forces are around 9 G-forces.
Amazing. Now, am I getting this case correct? Did it have anything to do with the ranch, the Bush Ranch?
Yeah. There was another object at the same time. There were a couple of objects. One was the one I just described. There's another one that was moving south, and it was moving directly towards the George Bush's ranch. This was back in 2008 when he was president. And so that's where he would stay when he wasn't at the White House. Now, on this particular day, he was not there, but no matter what, there is a 3.5 mile no-fly zone around that ranch. So this object is moving towards there, and I have 140 radar hits on this object. It's moving slowly towards the Bush Ranch. And I can see the F-16s all during this time because there's F-16s in the sky. They're doing routine maneuvers into a military operating area that's near there. And yet they don't do anything to intercept this object that's moving there. And I find 2 witnesses who lived within 2 miles of the Bush Ranch and I went and interviewed them personally. And they described an object that they saw that moved over the Bush Ranch and then suddenly accelerated at high speed and was gone within 1 to 2 seconds.
That is there's a couple of things that I want to say about, just kind of get your opinion. It always seems like people talk about, and I've interviewed people from everyday life that have talked about, their encounter, and they all say the same thing. It shoots off. It shoots off like faster than I've ever seen. Shoots off. I think that's really kind of unusual, that it seems like that's a typical thing that you hear about. I want to almost say most encounters. The thing was going very slow and all of a sudden it shoots off.
Yeah. It's just, that's exactly how Lieutenant Commander Slate, who was the second in command on the USS Princeton F-18 squadron, is when that object when Tic Tac took off. He said it's like you shot it out of a gun. It was gone.
It's so bizarre. Yeah.
Now, there's one other thing on that Stephenville case in the Bush Ranch incident that I don't think I've told you before, and this is something I found out within the last 2 years, was Jay Stratton, who was the head of the UAP task force. He has told me this, as has Chris Mellon, that Jay interviewed some of the pilots of those F-16s, right? Because they had read our report on the Stephenville case. And so he wanted to get firsthand information from the pilots. All the pilots refused to speak to him. Huh? Even though he has a top secret clearance.
Is that right?
Head of the UAP task force. He couldn't get them to talk to him.
That is, I wonder why. I wonder if they were threatened or something, or why would they, it doesn't even.
Well, I mean, even though you may have a top secret clearance, that doesn't mean you have the right to know on a given incident, right? So you have to have a right to know to be able to do that. So that's probably why they didn't tell him anything about it.
And another thing that people ask me a lot, I don't know if you've ever heard this question, but why the lights?
Oh, yeah. No, I wonder that myself, Martin.
Yeah.
I mean, why the lights? What do you need the lights for? You're talking about on the UFOs, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So my best guess is that it's just part of their propulsion system, and it's just a side effect. I doubt that there is intention with the lights, unless they just do it to help. Let's say, oh, let's not let those Earthlings accidentally crash into us, or something like that, so they turn on lights. But I suspect it's just a artifact of their propulsion systems.
And I mean, this is just a thought. A lot of, the Tic Tac is different, but a lot of the sightings seem to be at nighttime. And I'm wondering if it's just because we see the lights at night, when normally, nothing may draw our attention to the sky during the day, unless we saw a quick movement or something like that.
Right. And that is probably the bulk of the answer to that question. Take, for example, the planet Venus, right? During the daytime, it's possible, if you know exactly where Venus is, and it's not in the, the brightest time of the day, but say maybe around 5 o'clock or something like that. If you know where it is, you can barely make it out. But if it was nighttime, it just stands out like a bright diamond, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way you're going to miss it. Same thing with an aircraft. An aircraft that's 15 miles away at nighttime, you're going to see because of the light on the aircraft. But in the daytime, it's just going to be a speck in the sky. And unless your eyes were focused for some reason right on that speck, you're not going to see it.
All right. So just switching gears a little bit. I recorded with you about the AARO report that came out, and you basically had a lot of really good points that, and I'd like for you to just talk about the scientific evidence that there's no example. There's nothing like you make an analogy. I want to talk about that, but also I want to ask you, do you have any high hopes at all for the second report, which is the historic report?
No, I have no hopes for their second report. I mean, the first report was so horrible. I don't know why the second report would be any better.
Right.
It would almost be like in college. I'm a professor. It's like, okay, I just got a paper for my a student. I'm giving him a D-. It's so bad. I don't anticipate his next report is going to be much better.
And your analogy, if you would, you made this analogy about looking for Earth-like planets. Well, we have to have science. So what was their science and their conclusion that there is no signs of extraterrestrial? I believe.
Yeah, I mean, the main thrust of their paper, right? And let me say, the purpose of their paper was not supposed to be about this. Congress gave them why that paper was supposed to be written. And that paper was to have been written to look at the history of UFOs from 1945 to modern day. Their job doing that was extremely poor. What they focused on was trying to make the point that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, right? But in science, if you're going to make that statement, you have to define what is the evidence you're looking for, right? And they never do that. So you can't claim there is or is not extraterrestrial intelligence, evidence of it, until you define what is the evidence you're looking for, right? I mean, are you looking for a dead body? Are you looking for a crashed spacecraft? Well, I mean, if that's the evidence they were looking for, now they'll probably never find evidence of it.
Right.
But if you're looking for extreme acceleration, that evidence already exists today.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're right at the end of the show. Thank you so much. Here's the book, UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. Love it, and always enjoy you as a guest very much. And so we'll be back next week with Mike Fioriotto. And again, I'm going to be at this conference, so you may be seeing some clips from me there. Thank you so much, Robert. Always a lot of fun to talk to you.
Thank you, Martin. I enjoyed our conversation again.
Yes, you bet. And so again, we'll be back next week at the regular time and everything. You'll probably see some clips if you're watching online. And thank you, Robert. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.